The day my sister got a standing ovation at her college graduation, I was in the back of the auditorium, in a folding chair that had been set out for late arrivals. Not because I was late, because there hadn't been a seat saved for me. My name is Marlene Collier. I am 51 years old, and I have spent the better part of my life learning how to take up as little space as possible in a family that never quite had room for me. I know how that sounds. I know it sounds like self-pity, like the kind of complaint that comes out of therapy sessions and late-night conversations with patient friends. But the thing about growing up invisible is that eventually you stop fighting it. You just adapt. You learn to eat before the family dinner because the good food is always gone by the time your mother thinks to call your name. You learn to schedule your own doctor's appointments. You learn to celebrate your own birthdays, quietly, alone, with a cupcake from the gas station bakery and a candle you light over the kitchen sink. You learn that the love in your house has a hierarchy, and you are at the bottom of it. My sister's name is Renata. She is 3 years younger than me, and she has been my mother's entire world since the moment she was born. I have never resented Renata for that. Not really. You can't resent a person for being loved. But I spent a long time resenting the system that decided one of us was worthy of love and the other one had to prove it every day and still come up short. By the time I was standing in that auditorium doorway watching my family cheer for Renata's diploma, I had already built a life of my own. A good one, actually. I had a job I was proud of, senior accountant at a firm that had given me 3 promotions in 8 years. I had a house I'd bought on my own, a small craftsman bungalow in a quiet neighborhood outside Columbus, Ohio. I had a dog named Pepper, and a kitchen garden, and a group of friends who showed up when I called. What I did not have was a seat at the table. My mother spotted me standing in the back and gave me the look she'd been giving me since I was 7 years old, that tight, polite smile that said she was pleased I came, but hadn't necessarily expected me to. My father gave me a wave, like a neighbor he'd recognized across a parking lot. Renata didn't see me at all. She was busy being embraced by everyone she'd ever known. I drove home by myself that evening, and I thought, not for the first time, about my grandmother, Cecilia. Grandma Cecilia had been dead for 6 months by then, and she had left a letter. I didn't know that yet. Nobody had told me, but I felt it, the way you sometimes feel the approach of something significant before it announces itself, like a pressure change before a storm. Something was coming. I could feel it in my chest the whole drive home, the whole quiet evening, the whole long night I lay awake listening to Pepper breathe. I just didn't know yet what it was going to cost everyone else. Let me tell you about Cecilia May Dunbar, because if this story has a hero, it is her. She was born in 1934 in rural Tennessee, the daughter of a sharecropper and a woman who could make a meal out of nothing and still have something left over for a neighbor. Cecilia grew up understanding scarcity, which meant she also understood value, real value, not the kind that announced itself, but the quiet, persistent kind that kept showing up day after day without being asked. She married my grandfather, Robert Dunbar, in 1955. He was a good man with a stubborn streak and a talent for fixing anything mechanical. They built a life together in Cincinnati, raised 3 children, and by the time she was 60, Cecilia had done something remarkable for a woman of her background and generation. She had quietly, systematically, patiently accumulated wealth. Not through inheritance, not through luck, through 30 years of careful saving, intelligent investing she had taught herself from library books before the internet existed, and a series of property purchases that the rest of the family never took seriously, because nobody took Grandma's financial opinion seriously. They thought she was just a sweet old woman who made good cornbread and kept her house too warm in winter. She was worth just under $2 million when she died. Nobody knew, not even my mother, who had been managing what she believed were Cecilia's financials for the last decade. What my mother had been managing was one checking account, the account Cecilia used for groceries and utilities and birthday cards. The main account, the investments, the properties, those were handled through a private attorney named Gerald Ashworth out of a firm in downtown Cincinnati that my mother had never heard of because Cecilia had never mentioned it. Cecilia was the only person in my family who had always, consistently treated me like I mattered. She called me every Sunday. Not a quick check-in, a real conversation, the kind that lasted an hour, sometimes two. She asked about my work, my garden, my thoughts on things she'd read. She remembered everything I told her. When I bought my house, she came to visit before my parents did. When I got promoted the first time, she sent me a handwritten card that I still have in my desk drawer. It says, "Marlene, I have always known you were going to be extraordinary. The world is catching up." She never said a bad word about my mother or Renata. She wasn't that kind of person, but she had eyes and a long memory, and she watched our family with the calm, patient attention of a woman who had seen a great deal in her life and understood that most of what people reveal about themselves, they reveal without intending to. She saw what my parents did to me. She saw it, and she remembered it, and she did something about it. I just didn't know that yet. What I did know 6 months after her funeral was that my mother had called a family meeting, a real one, not the loose optional kind, but the kind where she called 3 times until you confirmed you were coming. She'd set it for a Saturday at her house in Westerly. She said it was about settling Grandma's estate. I went. Of course I went. I packed an overnight bag because I didn't trust myself not to drink too much wine if things got tense, and I drove the 40 minutes to my parents' house with the radio off, thinking about Cecilia and the pressure in my chest that had been there since the auditorium.
My parents' house always felt like a museum dedicated to Renata. That is not an exaggeration. Walk in the front door and the first thing you see is a gallery wall. 30 years of professional photographs, school portraits, recital programs. Renata at 5 in a pink tutu. Renata at 8 holding a spelling bee trophy. Renata at 16, homecoming queen. Renata at 22, in her graduation cap and gown, front and center, the whole family beaming around her. I appear in one photograph, a family portrait taken when I was 9. I'm on the end, slightly out of frame, because the photographer had misjudged the spacing and nobody asked to retake it. I know the exact photograph. I've looked at it every time I've been in that house for 40 years. Renata was already there when I arrived. She was sitting at the kitchen island with a glass of wine, looking like she'd come straight from a spa weekend, blonde highlights fresh, nails done, dressed in one of those effortlessly expensive-looking outfits that I knew had cost more than my car payment. She was 38, and she had never held a job longer than 2 years, but she had married well twice, and was currently, from what I understood, in the comfortable in-between state of being recently divorced from husband number 2 and already fielding options for number 3. She gave me a bright smile when I came in. "Marlene, you look tired." "I drove 40 minutes. You should move closer. Mom and Dad would love it." I said nothing to that. I poured myself a glass of water and found a seat at the kitchen table, away from the island. My mother came out of the back bedroom looking energized in the way she always looked energized when she was about to be the center of something. My mother, her name is Patricia, Patty to her friends, is a woman who runs on occasion. She needs an event, a gathering, a problem to organize around. She had been in her element since Cecilia died, taking charge of the arrangements, the obituary, the reception. Now she had the estate to manage, and she was clearly ready. My father, Gerald Collier, came out behind her and settled into his armchair with the quiet, agreeable passivity that had characterized our relationship to our family dynamics for as long as I could remember. My father is not a bad man. He is, however, a man who learned early that the path of least resistance in our household was to let my mother drive, and he has been a passenger ever since. "So," my mother said, sitting across from me at the kitchen table and folding her hands in that precise way she has, "Grandma's estate. Is there an attorney involved?" My mother blinked. "Why would there be an attorney?" "Because estate settlements usually involve one." "Marlene." She said my name the way she always said my name, a fraction too patient, like she was explaining something to a child who kept asking the wrong questions. "It's straightforward. Grandma had her checking account, her savings, and the house. The house is going to Renata since she's the one who can actually use the space, and will split the liquid assets between the family." I noticed she didn't specify what "split between the family" meant. "How much is in the accounts?" I asked. Another blink. "I don't see why that's, we'll distribute it equitably." "What does equitably mean?" Renata put her wineglass down. "Why are you being like this?" "Like what?" "Difficult." She said it gently, like she was concerned for me. "This is a hard time for everyone. Mom is just trying to handle things efficiently." I looked at my mother. "Did Grandma have a will?" There was a pause, a small one, but I caught it. "She had a simple will, from years ago. It named me as executor." "Can I see it?" "Marlene." "I'd like to see the will." The look that passed between my mother and my sister was fast, practiced, the kind of look that exists between two people who have had 1,000 quiet conversations about you in your absence. "I'll have my attorney review it," I said, and I surprised myself with how steady my voice was. "Before anything is distributed." The temperature in that kitchen dropped about 10 degrees. My mother sat back. "Your attorney?" "Yes." "You have an attorney?" "I have an accountant who can recommend one. It's a straightforward request." My mother stood up, and her voice went quiet in that particular way it went quiet when she was controlling something much louder underneath. "I have spent 6 months handling your grandmother's affairs, Marlene. I have done it without complaint, without help from you. I offered to help. You said you had it. And now you come in here and accuse me of something." "I haven't accused you of anything. I asked to see the will." This is exactly like you, and she wasn't being gentle anymore. "You always have to make everything into a conflict." I picked up my purse. "I'll be in touch through an attorney," I said. "Thank you for the water." I drove home with the windows down and Pepper waiting at the door, and that pressure in my chest transformed into something else entirely. Not anger, something quieter and more certain than anger. I called my accountant, David Chen, on Sunday morning. He gave me the name of an estate attorney. I left a message. By Tuesday, everything changed. The attorney called me back on a Tuesday afternoon when I was eating lunch at my desk. His name was Marcus Webb, and he had a methodical, unhurried voice that immediately made me feel like whatever he was about to tell me had been handled carefully. "Mr. Collier," he said, "before we discuss representation, I need to tell you something. I received a call this morning from an attorney named Gerald Ashworth. He said you might be reaching out." I set down my fork. "I've never heard of Gerald Ashworth." "I believe that was intentional. Mr. Ashworth has been the personal attorney of Cecilia May Dunbar for approximately 32 years. He handled her estate planning, her investments, and her final documents. He's been trying to locate you." The room went very quiet. "Locate me?" "Ms. Collier, are you sitting down?" I was, but I sat up straighter. "Yes." "Your grandmother had a primary will. The one your mother is aware of, the one naming her as executor, was written in 1991 and has not been updated since. However, there's a second, much more recent document, a revised will, drawn up in 2019 and amended in 2021, that supersedes the original entirely. It is the legally binding document. I didn't say anything. I could hear myself breathing. Under the revised will, Marcus continued, your grandmother has left her estate in full to you, Marlene Ann Collier, her granddaughter. My hand was flat on my desk. I stared at it like it belonged to someone else. The estate, I said slowly, includes the family home in Cincinnati, currently valued at approximately $410,000, a portfolio of investments, stocks, bonds, and 2 rental properties in the greater Cincinnati area, currently valued at approximately $1.4 million, and a personal savings account with a balance of $114,000. I was doing the math. I had been an accountant for 23 years, and I was doing the math automatically even though I couldn't feel my hands. Nearly $2 million, I said. 1.92 approximately, plus the house. And my mother doesn't know about this. There was a faint pause. Mr. Ashworth indicated that your grandmother specifically chose not to inform any other family members of the revised documents. She was concerned about, his word, interference. I closed my eyes. I thought about Cecilia, about Sunday phone calls, about a card in my desk drawer that said the world is catching up. She had known. She had known for years, and she had planned for this, and she had protected me from it being taken away before I even knew it existed. There's also a letter, a personal letter from your grandmother, to be read by you privately before any other proceedings. Mr. Ashworth has it. He's asked me to convey that whenever you're ready. I took a shaky breath. When can I come in?
I drove to Cincinnati on a Thursday morning. Gerald Ashworth's office was in a quietly prestigious building downtown, not flashy, not trying to impress, just solid and well-maintained, the way old money tends to present itself. Mr. Ashworth was a white-haired man in his early 70s, with wire-rimmed glasses and the careful, contained affect of someone who had sat across from grieving families for decades and knew how to hold space for all of it. He shook my hand. He offered me coffee. He set a sealed envelope on the table between us, and then he stepped out and closed the door. The envelope had my name on it in my grandmother's handwriting. Marlene. That was it. Just my name in blue ink, in the looping cursive she'd used her whole life. I had seen that handwriting on birthday cards and Christmas letters and the card that still lived in my desk drawer. I knew it as well as I knew my own. I sat with the envelope in my hands for a long time before I opened it. Then I unfolded 4 pages of Cecilia's handwriting, and I read, My dearest Marlene, if you're reading this, then Gerald has found you, and I am gone, and I want to start by saying what I should have said to your face 100 times over. I am so proud of you. Not of what you've accomplished, though that is considerable, but of who you are, the kind of person you became in spite of everything. I want you to understand some things before you hear from the rest of the family. I want you to have the full picture so that when they come to you, and they will come, you are standing on solid ground. Your mother loves you, Marlene. I believe that because I raised her and I know what's underneath all that difficult behavior. But love and attention are not the same thing, and she has given you very little of the latter. This began before you were old enough to understand it, and it was not your fault. It was never your fault. You were a child, and a very good one, and you deserved better than you received in that house. I watched it for 30 years. I tried, in the ways that were available to me, to correct it, to make sure you knew you were seen, that you were valued, that someone in your family understood your worth. The Sunday calls, the visits, the cards. I hope they helped, even a little. Now I am giving you what I should have been able to give you all along: security, freedom, the knowledge that someone who loves you thought about your future and prepared for it. I have left everything to you, and I want to be clear why. It is not a punishment for your mother or your sister. It is not a message I want delivered through them. It is a decision I made based on 30 years of paying attention. You are the one who has worked. You are the one who has asked for nothing. You are the one I have watched build a life with nothing but your own 2 hands and your own considerable intelligence. You earned this, even though you didn't know you were earning it. You earned it simply by being the person you are. I also want to be honest with you. Your mother has been managing what she thought were my primary finances for several years. She is not aware of the full picture. I kept my primary estate separate from what she knew about, because I knew that if she understood the scope of it, there would be pressure. Gentle pressure, well-intentioned pressure, but pressure nonetheless, to arrange things differently. I did not want things arranged differently. I wanted them arranged for you. You are going to face some anger, probably a great deal of it. I want you to be prepared for that, and I want you to remember when it comes, you did not take anything from them. I gave it to you. There is a difference. You stand on the right side of that difference. There is one more thing I want to say. Take the house on Clybourne Street. I know it needs some work, but it has good bones, and I have always believed that the things worth having are the things worth tending. Take the house, and the garden, and the old oak in the backyard that I have been watching for 60 years. Plant something there, grow something. You have always known how to do that. All my love, always, Grandma Cecilia. I sat in that office for a long time after I finished reading. Mr. Ashworth came back eventually, with tissues and more coffee and the quiet dignity of a man who has helped a lot of people carry big things. We talked for 2 hours. By the time I left, I had a plan, or the beginning of one. I did not call my mother, not yet. If you've ever been part of a family that runs on a specific social architecture where everyone knows their role and their place, and the whole structure depends on those roles staying fixed, then you know what happens when something shifts without warning. It doesn't bend, it fractures. The fracture began 11 days later when Gerald Ashworth sent the formal notice of the revised will to my mother's address. My phone rang at 7:43 in the morning. I was in my kitchen with a cup of coffee, watching Pepper investigate a squirrel in the backyard. I saw my mother's name on the screen, and I let it ring twice before I answered. "What is this?" Her voice was flat, not a question. "Good morning, Mom." "Marlene, what is this document?" "It's Grandma's will, the real one. I am the executor. You are the named executor of a 1991 document that has been superseded by a legally binding 2019 revision. The revised will names me as sole beneficiary and names Gerald Ashworth as executor. He's already filed with probate." There was a sound on the other end of the line that I had never heard from my mother before, something breaking open and then closing again very fast. "You did this," she said. You went behind our backs. I made one phone call to my accountant, who referred me to an attorney. That's all I did. Everything else was Grandma's decision. She made it in 2019. Grandma she wasn't thinking clearly in her last years. I had been waiting for this. I had hoped I wouldn't have to use what I had, but I had prepared. Mr. Ashworth had Grandma evaluated by 2 independent physicians in 2021 before the amendment was finalized. Cognitive testing, psychological assessments, both on record. She was entirely competent. He anticipated a challenge and he prepared for one. A long silence. "She left everything to you?" my mother said, and her voice had gone to something I almost didn't recognize, something raw and bewildered. "She left everything to you?" "Yes. Not me, not Renata, not... Why?" And here was the moment I had thought about the most. Here was the fork in the road. I could have said, because you spent 30 years making me feel like I didn't exist. I could have read her the letter, or summarized it, or weaponized it. I could have delivered a verdict. I didn't. I said, because she loved me, and she knew I would take care of what she built. That's all. If you enjoy stories where truth eventually finds its way, consider subscribing to Silent Victory Stories. There are thousands of stories like this one, quiet, real, and worth hearing. The subscribe button is right there. My mother hung up.
Renata called 3 hours later. Where my mother had been cold and brittle, Renata was warm and immediate, the emotional register she deployed when she needed something. I'd grown up watching that warmth turned toward my mother, toward teachers, toward boyfriends, toward anyone who had something she wanted. It was genuine in its way. Renata wasn't calculating so much as she was reflexively charming, which is a slightly different thing and in some ways more exhausting to deal with. "Marlene," she said, and she sounded like she might cry. I need to understand. Can we talk? Can I come see you?" "We can talk on the phone." A small, surprised pause. In the past, I would have said yes. In the past, I would have said, "Yes, come over, let me make us tea, let me sit with your feelings before I process my own." I had spent my whole life saying yes to this family when I should have said something else. If you're watching this and you've ever felt like the forgotten one, drop a comment below. I read every single one. You're not alone. 2 weeks later, my father called. Not my mother, my father. Gerald Collier, the man who had spent 50 years agreeing with my mother and waving at me across parking lots, called me on a Wednesday evening and asked if he could come see me. Not at his house, at mine. I said yes. He arrived on a Thursday afternoon with a bottle of wine he'd clearly agonized over because there was a sticker on the bottom that suggested he'd started with a different bottle and then changed his mind. He sat at my kitchen table with the careful posture of a man who had something to say and wasn't sure he deserved to say it. "Your grandmother loved you very much," he said, which wasn't what I expected to be the opening. "I know," I said. "I think," he stopped, tried again. "I think your mother and you were always—" He stopped a second time, and I watched him struggle, and I felt something toward him that I hadn't felt for a long time, maybe ever. Tenderness. "Dad," I said, "it's okay." "It's not," he said. "It isn't. You were our daughter, you are our daughter, and we made you feel like you were an afterthought, both of us. I know I can't fix that." I had not cried yet through any of this, not when I'd read the letter, not when my mother had hung up on me, not when Renata had cried on the phone. But something about my father sitting in my kitchen with a bottle of wine he'd changed his mind about 3 times, something about that cracked the sealed container I'd been carrying for a very long time. I cried a little. He cried more. Pepper sat between us and looked concerned. It wasn't a repair, one conversation doesn't do that, but it was something, the beginning of something honest, which is the only thing any repair can be built on. He left 2 hours later. At the door, he hugged me, a real hug, long enough to mean something. "I'm glad she left it to you," he said. "I want you to know that. I told your mother, I'm glad she left it to you." I took possession of the Claiborne Street house in October. It was a Thursday afternoon, overcast and cool, the kind of autumn day that smells like wood smoke and something ending. I parked in front and I sat in my car for a while, just looking at it. Cecilia's house, the house where she had raised my mother and her 2 brothers, the house where I had spent every Christmas of my childhood, where I had sat in the warm kitchen while she made cornbread and told me things that mattered, the house with the oak tree in the backyard that she had been watching for 60 years. It needed work, she'd said so in the letter. The porch railing was soft in 2 spots, the paint was peeling around the upper windows, the garden had gone to seed in the years since her health had started declining. But the bones were good, I could see that from the curb. I went inside. The house smelled like her, faintly, the way old houses hold their people long after they've gone, like lavender and cedar and something sweet underneath. I walked through the room slowly, touching things. Her reading chair by the window, the sideboard where she kept the good dishes, the kitchen with its big windows and the view of the back garden. I went out back and stood under the oak tree. It was enormous. I had climbed it as a child, or tried to, and she had stood below with her arms loose at her sides, ready to catch me, watching with that particular expression she had, calm, attentive, completely unworried, like she already knew I was going to be fine. I put my hand on the bark. The tree was old and patient and permanent in the way that very few things are, and standing under it, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, maybe ever. I felt like I belonged somewhere. I called my realtor from the backyard. I called David Chen. I called Marcus Webb. I had decisions to make, what to do with the investments, the rental properties, whether to sell my house in Columbus or keep both, the practical architecture of a new financial reality. But first, I just stood there for a while longer, under the tree my grandmother had been watching for 60 years, thinking about planting something. "Okay," she said. "Okay. Marlene, we're family. Whatever happened between you and Mom, whatever issues you have, this isn't fair. The house, Grandma's house, that belongs to all of us. It belonged to Grandma, and she decided what to do with it. But she clearly wasn't. I mean, she had been slipping toward the end. 2 physicians evaluated her in 2021. I can have the attorney's office send you the documentation if that would help." Another pause, a longer one. "Why are you being so hard?" she said, and her voice cracked. "I'm your sister." And here it was, the question, the accusation dressed as vulnerability. "I know you're my sister. I've known that for 51 years. And for most of those 51 years, you've had everything and I've had whatever was left over. I don't say that to hurt you, Renata. I say it because I think on some level you've always known it too." Silence. "Grandma saw it. She loved you too, I want you to know that, but she also saw what our family was, and she made a decision about how to use what she had. That's her right. I didn't ask for it. I didn't know about it until 2 weeks ago, but I'm not going to apologize for it." Renata was crying now, quietly, with the particular dignity of a woman who has never had to cry hard for anything. I always assumed that eventually everything would be, that there would be something for me. "I know," I said, not unkindly. "And now there's nothing. There's the accounts Mom controls, there's her own estate, which isn't Grandma's, it's not the same. No, it isn't." We stayed on the phone for another few minutes. It wasn't warm and it wasn't cold. It was the honest temperature of 2 sisters in an unfamiliar landscape. When we hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time and looked at Pepper and tried to figure out what I was feeling. Not triumph, I want to be clear about that. I have heard people tell stories like this one with a kind of gloating energy, a look what they had to come in satisfaction, and I understand it, but that wasn't what I felt. What I felt was complicated and heavy and shot through with something that was equal parts grief and relief. Grief for the family I had never really had, Relief that someone, one person, the best one, the right one, had seen me clearly enough to do something about it. 2 weeks later, my father called. Not my mother, my father, Gerald Collier, the man who had spent 50 years agreeing with my mother and waving at me across parking lots, called me on a Wednesday evening and asked if he could come see me. Not at his house, at mine. I said yes. He arrived on a Thursday afternoon with a bottle of wine he'd clearly agonized over because there was a sticker on the bottom that suggested he'd started with a different bottle and then changed his mind. He sat at my kitchen table with the careful posture of a man who had something to say and wasn't sure he deserved to say it. "Your grandmother loved you very much," he said, which wasn't what I expected to be the opening. "I know," I said. "I think," he stopped, tried again. "I think your mother and we didn't, you were always," he stopped a second time, and I watched him struggle, and I felt something toward him that I hadn't felt in a long time, which was tenderness. "Dad," I said, "it's okay." "It's not," he said. "It isn't. You were our daughter. You are our daughter. And we made you feel like you were an afterthought, both of us. I know I can't fix that." I had not cried yet through any of this, not when I'd read the letter, not when my mother had hung up on me, not when Renata had cried on the phone. But something about my father sitting in my kitchen with a bottle of wine he'd changed his mind about 3 times, trying to say the thing he'd left unsaid for 50 years, something about that cracked the sealed container I'd been carrying for a very long time. I cried a little. He cried more. Pepper sat between us and looked concerned. It wasn't a repair. One conversation doesn't do that. But it was something, the beginning of something honest, which is the only thing any repair can be built on. He left 2 hours later. At the door, he hugged me. A real hug, long enough to mean something. "I'm glad she left it to you," he said. "I want you to know that. I told your mother, I'm glad she left it to you." I took possession of the Claiborne Street house in October. It was a Thursday afternoon, overcast and cool, the kind of autumn day that smells like wood smoke and something ending. I parked in front and I sat in my car for a while, just looking at it. Cecilia's house. The house where she had raised my mother and her 2 brothers, the house where I had sat every Christmas of my childhood, where she had sat in the warm kitchen while she made cornbread and told me things that mattered. The house with the oak tree in the backyard that she had been watching for 60 years. It needed work. She'd said so in the letter. The porch railing was soft in 2 spots. The paint was peeling around the upper windows. The garden had gone to seed in the years since her health had started declining. But the bones were good. I could see that from the curb. I went inside. The house smelled like her. Faintly, the way old houses hold their people long after they've gone, like lavender and cedar, and something sweet underneath. I walked through the room slowly, touching things. Her reading chair by the window, the sideboard where she kept the good dishes, the kitchen with its big windows and the view of the back garden. I went out back and stood under the oak tree. It was enormous. I had climbed it as a child, or tried to, and she had stood below with her arms loose at her sides, ready to catch me, watching with that particular expression she had, calm, attentive, completely unworried, like she already knew I was going to be fine. I put my hand on the bark. The tree was old and patient and permanent in the way that very few things are, and standing under it I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, maybe ever. I felt like I belonged somewhere. I called my realtor from the backyard. I called David Chen. I called Marcus Webb. I had decisions to make. What to do with the investments, the rental properties, whether to sell my house in Columbus or keep both, the practical architecture of a new financial reality. But first, I just stood there for a while longer.
under the tree my grandmother had been watching for 60 years, thinking about planting something. Here is what I will tell you about the months that followed, because I don't want to skip over them. My mother did not speak to me for 3 months. Then she called on a Sunday, the Sunday call time, the time Cecilia always called, which I don't think was accidental. She didn't apologize. Not exactly. She said she'd been thinking, and she said she understood now what the letter must have said, even though she hadn't read it, and she said she hadn't been fair to me. She said it the way people say things when the saying of them costs them something real. I heard her, I told her. I didn't say it was fine, because it wasn't, not yet, but I told her I heard her, and that I was willing to keep talking. Renata went through a period of genuine anger, and then, to her credit, came out the other side of it. I don't know what happened during those months in private, what she worked through, what she told herself, whether she talked to a therapist or a priest or a very patient best friend, but she showed up at my door in January with a casserole and a bottle of wine and the slightly wrecked look of someone who has been honest with themselves about something difficult. We ate dinner, we talked. It was careful and tentative and imperfect, and it was more real than any conversation we'd ever had. I kept the house on Claiborne Street. I put my Columbus house on the market in November and had an offer in 4 days. I spent the winter renovating Claiborne. Nothing extreme, just bringing it back to what it had been. The porch railing, the windows, the garden. I hired a landscape designer named June who had strong opinions about companion planting and who turned the back garden into something extraordinary over the course of a single spring. I planted tomatoes and herbs and a climbing rose along the back fence that Cecilia had always wanted and never gotten around to. Under the oak tree, I planted a Japanese maple, small, young, patient, something that would take a long time to become what it was going to be. I moved into Claiborne in February. Pepper adapted immediately, as dogs do. I set up my office in what had been Cecilia's sewing room. I put her reading chair by my bedroom window because it's the best seat in the house for morning light. I put the card in my desk drawer, the one that says, "The world is catching up." I am writing this, telling you this, from the kitchen of the Claiborne Street house on a Sunday afternoon in June. The garden is coming in. I can see June's raised beds from the window, and the climbing rose on the back fence has 3 open flowers and about 40 buds, and the Japanese maple is unfurling its new leaves in that deep reddish color that makes your breath catch if you're paying attention. Pepper is asleep in a rectangle of sunlight on the kitchen floor. I have been thinking this afternoon about what I know now that I didn't know a year ago. I know that the things we are denied don't always stay denied. Sometimes they come back around, through channels we couldn't have predicted, in forms we didn't know to hope for. My grandmother spent 32 years building something quietly and carefully and well, and she aimed it at me, and even though I didn't know it was coming, it came. I know that the love that matters most is the love that pays attention, not the love that announces itself on gallery walls and in standing ovations, the love that shows up on Sunday afternoons and remembers what you said 3 weeks ago and keeps a card in the desk that says you're going to be extraordinary. I know that forgiveness is not the same as forgetting. I am working on a relationship with my mother that is different from the one we had before, more honest, more boundaried, more clear-eyed. It is not the relationship I wished for when I was a child, but it is a real one, which is more than I had. I know that being overlooked can feel like a verdict. For a long time, I let it feel like one. I let my family's failure to see me convince me that I was somehow less seeable, that the problem was in me, not in their attention. I spent years being grateful for less than I deserved because I had been taught not to expect more.
My grandmother knew I was extraordinary before I did. She told me so year after year in the ordinary language of a woman who showed up and stayed. And then, when she was gone, she used everything she had to make sure I knew it permanently. That is the inheritance that matters most to me. Not the house, not the investments, not the numbers that Marcus Webb laid out on a table in downtown Cincinnati. The inheritance that matters is the 30 years of Sunday calls, the letters, the watching, the quiet, persistent communication that said, "I see you. I know who you are. The world is catching up." I hope someone in your life sees you like that, and if they don't, I hope you learn to see yourself that way, because I believe it is possible. I believe it because I have lived it. I spent 51 years waiting for a verdict from a family that wasn't qualified to give one. And then a woman who was quietly and carefully the best of all of us looked at me from across 30 years of Sunday calls and said, "You were the always the one." I'm going to go outside now and water the rose. Some things take a long time to bloom, but they bloom. If this story found you at the right moment, if something in it rang true, I hope you'll stay. Subscribe to Silent Victory Stories. There are more of us than we know, and we deserve to hear each other. Thank you for being here.